Morning Pacific time. Welcome everyone. I see people coming into the Zoom room right now. If you've ever attended one of these immigration webinars before, just know the best part of these webinars are your questions. So please put your questions down in the Q&A, and I'll do my best to respond to whatever questions you've got. I see a lot of current and former clients coming into the Zoom room, and there was quite a bit of interest in this session. Also, just a foreshadowing of things to come. The next few weeks, we're going to have some guests. So, in the past, in a more stable time, let's say, in immigration, I would have these sessions about once every few weeks when there was breaking news. But lately, just given the temperature of everything, I thought, let's have something a little bit more regular. So today, obviously, it's just me and you. I wanted the first Q&A of the year to be focused on you and your questions. Next week, we're bringing in the digital economist, Navroop Sahdev, who is the founder and CEO of the Digital Economist, a global think tank. She and I were just in Davos, Switzerland with the World Economic Forum talking about global migration, AI, blockchain, climate change. And Navroop has a very keen mind into what's just over the horizon. What's over the horizon in terms of blockchain? What's over the horizon in terms of AI? And like I said, she's the founder and CEO of a global think tank called the Digital Economist. So that's coming up next week. Free to register. Please ask your questions. Navroop always has something very interesting to say. I always learn something new from her every time I see her. So that's a really important special guest. The following week, Thursday the 27th, 10 a.m. Pacific time, we're having one of my most endeared colleagues, Heather Poole. Heather is a certified specialist in immigration. So as some of you know, in immigration, we see things in kind of three different buckets: humanitarian-based immigration, asylum, deportation defense, the Convention Against Torture, family-based immigration, and employment-based immigration. I do family-based and I do employment-based. Heather does humanitarian-based immigration. Different courts, different procedures, different rule books, different client profile. Heather runs one of the top law firms in the country when it comes to humanitarian-based immigration. So I'm keen to learn from her what happens when ICE shows up. If you're in the United States, if you're undocumented, or you have a loved one who's undocumented, or you're just worried about your own rights. The issue now, sadly, is I think there's a sense of aggression on the part of immigration and customs enforcement to the point where U.S. citizens, people who are here lawfully, might be worried about running into ICE. So that's what we've got coming up on Thursday, the 27th of February, 10 a.m. Again, free to register. In the follow-up to today's session, I'll put links to those registrations. And as always, we're recording today's session, so if you have to dip out partway through, I'll send a recording to everyone who registered for the panel. So please do ask your questions. Thank you, Skyer. That's a very nice thing to say. So I wanted to start today's session by taking a macro look at what's going on with immigration. Remember, U.S. immigration law is one of the most complicated areas of the law that exists. Maybe U.S. tax law and U.S. immigration law are tied for complexity. And in the world, there is no more complicated immigration system than the U.S. immigration system. There are some countries like Japan, which just doesn't have a functional system for people to become fully incorporated with their society. There are other countries in the world where the guest worker program is very easy, like places like the UAE. But then there are places like the United States where who we let in and under what circumstances is very complicated. The U.S. in popular culture, in our own way of talking about ourselves, we are a nation of immigrants. Unless you are a Native American person and every one of your ancestors crossed over the Bering Land Bridge 10,000 or 13,000 years ago, your ancestors came from somewhere else. The first people to come to these shores were enslaved people. Europeans brought over enslaved people from Africa. Europeans came over. Here on the West Coast, we brought in a lot of labor through various means from Asia, from China in particular. And for our history, as we become a more perfect union, as we aspire to and aim to, most of us aim to live up to our aspirational founding documents, that all human beings are created equal. We are, evolving in terms of immigration. There's always a sense of, in every generation, a sense of do we close the door behind us after we've gotten through? My own immigrant ancestors who came to the United States from southern Italy, from the former Czech Republic, well, former Czechoslovakia, now Czech Republic. They were very poor people. They didn't speak English. They probably wouldn't be qualified for the kinds of visas and green cards that I prepare and file on a daily basis. And I'll hear it from my own family members sometimes, well, they did it the right way. Well, the right way has changed a lot in the last century. When my ancestors came over in the early 1900s on one-way trips in steerage class, I don't think they could have imagined the world that we live in now. Nowadays, we have a complicated system of immigration that really crystallized in the 1960s. In 1965, President Lyndon Baines Johnson sought to modernize the U.S. immigration system. It had had some very explicitly racist quotas based on country of ancestry to preserve a certain ethnic composition of the United States. In 1965, those restrictions, those limitations were removed to be ethnicity neutral, or at least that was the plan. 1965, the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965 passed. It codified a long history of law, court cases, informal policies, etc., formalizing the ancient regime. 1965 comes and goes. For the time, it was a progressive legislation in keeping with the legislation of the time. The 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, meaning that African Americans could fully participate in commerce, in hotels, in restaurants, in public places. 1964, the Civil Rights Act. 1965, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. African Americans could now be protected in voting where they had been restricted due to local laws, especially in the U.S. South. There were crazy laws like, guess the number of soap bubbles on the bar of soap, guess the number of jelly beans in the jar, and poll taxes to prevent African Americans from voting. A tax on voting that many poor people couldn't pay. So those were all done away with in 1965, and as a third sort of complement to that anti-racist pattern of lawmaking, the 1965 Immigration and Naturalization Act was passed. Fast forward to the 1980s. There was a lot of in-migration, from Mexico, from Central America, from South America, people leaving those places to seek better economic opportunities, entering irregularly, coming across the land crossing in the desert. When I was growing up in the 1980s, this was a big subject of conversation as a person living in Southern California as a little kid. There were students I went to high school with and elementary school with who were born outside the United States, and their integration into Southern California society was sometimes a fraught thing, the language issues especially. 1986, Ronald Reagan and Congress passed the 1986 immigration law, which was the last amnesty that this country has passed. So if you had entered the United States before that 1986 law came into existence, Ronald Reagan, people forget this nowadays, Ronald Reagan, famous Republican, passed the 1986 amnesty law, which said if you were in the United States and you hadn't committed crimes and you had paid your taxes, you'd be granted a green card, and then eventually you could become a naturalized U.S. citizen. All the while, let me back up a little bit. All the while, since 1865, we've had the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which says any human being, all human beings born in the United States are automatically U.S. citizens, regardless of who your parents are, regardless of how you got here, your parents got here. If you were born in the United States, you're automatically a U.S. citizen. That's how I'm a U.S. citizen. I was born in the United States. There's no inquiry into my mother's legal status or my father's legal status. That's just not an issue. So, okay, now 1986, the last amnesty. We've had all this time. The 80s go by. Now we're in the early 1990s. What's coming on board? Well, we are seeing people, change the way they work. They're changing the way that they go to work. Technology is starting to really have an influence on that. We need to modernize the United States immigration system. So the last big immigration bill comes to place in the 1990s. That's how we get our current system. The Immigration Act of 1991, signed into law by President George H.W. Bush, also a Republican, negotiating with the Democrats in Congress. In my book, Extraordinary Aliens, I interviewed the main congressman, who was then in his 40s, now in his late 70s, semi-retired guy, very interesting guy, who was the architect of the 1991 bill. And when I interviewed him around this time last year for my book, what impressed me so much about him was the lack of ego, the lack of bravado. He was trying to get a deal done that everyone could live with, that the most conservative Republicans, the most liberal Democrats, and a centrist, center-right George H.W. Bush. Remember, George H.W. Bush is the father. George W. Bush is the son in the early 2000s. So we've got a bipartisan compromise bill, and since that time, there's been attempts at legislation. There were attempts at legislation in the later parts of the 90s. In the 2000s, George W. Bush, the son, proposed some immigration reforms. In the Obama presidency in 2008, 2010, President Obama, center-left Democrat, and Speaker Paul Ryan, if you remember him, center-right Republican, had come up with what they thought was a good compromise bill. Paul Ryan could not sell it to his conservative members of his Republican caucus, so the bill never left committee. The bill never got a floor vote, and so it did not become law. The balance is always the same sort of political bargains: border security, enforcement versus benefits adjudication, and how do we deal with the people who are here undocumented? Because even though we had that amnesty in 1986, we've continued to have people who are in the United States unlawfully. And when we talk about people who are here unlawfully, the old stereotype is that the people who are here unlawfully snuck across the border. Maybe they came looking for economic opportunities. Maybe they came, a lot of single men would come work seasonally and send money back home. Nowadays, most people who come to the United States and are undocumented entered lawfully. They came as a tourist. They went to an airport. They were admitted under normal admission procedures, and then they just never left. So they are undocumented. One of the tragedies, I think, of the 90s immigration bill was a penalty structure that traps people in the United States. If you're here and you're out of status, so you say your tourist visa is set to end February 13th, 2025, and you don't leave, you just stay, on February 14th, 2025, you are now 1 day overstayed. No automatic penalty from day one to day 180. But after day 180, if you depart, you trigger a 3-year ban on reentry. If you're here for more than a year, if you get more than a year of unlawful presence, then you trigger a 10-year ban on reentry. Those bans are triggered when you depart. So it creates a perverse incentive structure for people to remain in the US. Estimates are between 12 and 15 million people who are here in the United States and are undocumented. Paul Ryan, a Catholic, fairly moderate Republican, center-right Republican, said to Barack Obama privately, which has been reported since, that he did not want to have a permanent underclass in the United States. People who are here unlawfully, who pay into the Social Security system, pay their taxes, pay into Medicare and Medicaid, but who cannot collect benefits. One of the myths that people will say is that immigrants are here collecting benefits. They cannot collect benefits. They pay into it. They pay into the system through their employer contributions, but they do not collect Social Security. They don't collect Medicare. They don't collect Medicaid. So they're not eligible for food stamps. They're not eligible for Section 8 housing. So it really is a permanent underclass in Paul Ryan's terms. Now, is there any chance of an immigration bill that will change this fundamental system? And part of why I wrote my book last year was to address concerns that people had, that people looking to immigrate in 25, 26, 27 would be subject to changes in the immigration law. I just don't see that happening. So we've got a system that is very flawed, that is imperfect at best. We've got a system that is very behind the times in terms of technology. We're still in the world of paper filings. We're still in the world of mailed responses, right? We're waiting on the regular US mail to get information from the government. This could all be modernized and streamlined. It is a source of great frustration to me. I just sent out a case yesterday, an EB1 green card case, which was about 1,500 pages. Just the logistics of printing and sending a 1,500 printed page case is remarkable. Now, in federal court, since I was in law school, since almost 20 years ago, there have only been electronic filings. So any chance I get, anytime I speak to a member of Congress or a member of any administration, this is one of my subjects. Can we just modernize the system to cut down on waste, to cut down on carbon emissions, to cut down on error? So far, it doesn't seem to be happening, and I don't expect it will be happening anytime soon. So even the mechanics of the immigration system doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. Now, if you're following the news, you might say, well, what about this Doge thing, this doggy thing that Elon Musk is doing? What about these executive orders that Trump is signing? And the response to that is, I would suggest you ignore that kind of noise if you're making immigration plans. There was not a time in the first Trump administration for those 4 years where we did not file a case and we held it and said, let's just wait for a better administration. There was not a day that went by in those 4 years, despite COVID, despite all the irregularity and frankly nonsense with Trump, the Muslim ban, various iterations of that. There was just not a time that we did that. The only thing in those 4 years that really affected any of my clients was a rather archaic rule called the public charge rule. So it's an old-fashioned term, public charge. It means, are you going to be a liability to the government? And if you're immigrating to the United States and trying to get your green card, we have a rule that says if the government thinks that you will be a public charge, in other words, that you don't have enough money to pay for your own care and say you need round-the-clock hospitalization or intensive medical care due to severe illness, but you are unable to care for yourself, the government may find you inadmissible as an immigrant to get a green card if you are a public charge. The old rules, the 1990s era rules, had served us pretty well. Trump changed that, and after some litigation, we had a new form that we had to fill out, which included information about a person's income, their debts, their credit score, their education. And out of that, an immigration officer was supposed to determine whether or not you were going to be a public charge. We never had anyone denied on that, and it was challenged in court. And then by the time that the Biden administration came into office, the quickest way to get rid of it was for Biden not to continue defending the public charge rule in court. So it went away due to lack of being defended in court, and then it was formally revoked. So if someone wants to revive that old public charge rule, no one's made any comments like that I've seen in the press. Right now, we have a Homeland Security Secretary in Kristi Noem, former South Dakota governor, most famously known for shooting her dog and a donkey or a mule that she didn't like about 20 years ago. I don't know that she's the right pick, but that's what Trump has decided, that he wants Kristi Noem. We do not have a USCIS director. So remember, in our system of government, we have three co-equal branches of government: the executive, headed by Trump, the legislative, which is Congress, and then the judicial, which ends in the Supreme Court. And they balance off one another. So Trump, as the head of the executive, gets to appoint the cabinet, the Secretary of Homeland Security, which is Kristi Noem, the Secretary of State, which is now Marco Rubio, former Florida congressman. Under Kristi Noem, there will eventually be a USCIS director. USCIS is a gigantic agency. It's the agency that I deal with most. If you've ever filed an immigration petition with the government, you have filed it with USCIS. But what you've got to remember is that from the low-level people that open the FedEx packages to the service center directors, all of those people are career civil service employees. None of those people, the people who actually touch your case, are appointed by any president. They can't be hired or fired by the president. So everyone who touches a particular case. Now, at the very highest level, the Kristi Noems and whoever the USCIS director will end up being might do helpful things like streamline the mailing system, or streamline the electronic filing system, or they might make decisions like what enforcement priorities there are, and how many resources they're dedicating to different units within the processing system. But like I said, everyone who touches your case, from the low-level person to the director of the service center that adjudicates the case, all of those people are career civil servants. That's not something that a president can change. So, like I said, everyone who touches your case, from the low-level person to the high-level person, is a career civil servant, hired and fired according to civil service rules. There was never a time during the first Trump administration where we held a case, but there were times in any administration where we get a decision that we don't like. And when we get a case that is really outrageous, that is truly an egregious denial, we always have the opportunity to sue the government in federal court. And you might say, well, Joe, if I sue the government in federal court, will they look down upon me? Will they retaliate against me? The answer is no. As counterintuitive as that might seem, there are two important laws that were passed by Congress many decades ago called the Mandamus Act and the Administrative Procedures Act. Mandamus is just a Latin term for mandate, for order. You go to court and you say judge, federal judge with a lifetime appointment who cannot be fired by the president. They can only be removed due to impeachment. That's very hard to do. It usually happens in cases of corruption, bribery. A Trump-appointed federal judge recently resigned under threat of impeachment during the Biden years because he had committed sexual assault against some of his staffers. And it was pretty obvious that he had done that. So he resigned rather than being impeached. So if we get a decision we don't like, we go to federal court. The federal judge who might, it's a lottery, might have been appointed by Trump in his first term, might have been appointed by Biden, might have been appointed by Obama, we still have some George W. Bush and Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush appointed judges who have senior status we might get. But those judges have lifetime appointments. So we have the opportunity to file the lawsuit under the Mandamus Act, under the Administrative Procedures Act. We say, Judge, this decision was not in keeping with the law. The law says X and the government did Y. The administration did Y. Judge, mandate the administration to properly apply the law. And so in Obama years, Trump 1.0 years, Biden years, and I imagine in Trump 2.0 years, we will have decisions that we don't like. And we will have the opportunity to go to federal court and address those issues. Right now, I have a case currently pending in the federal court in Nebraska. Why Nebraska? Because there's a big immigration processing center in Nebraska. So we filed a lawsuit there. And we filed a lawsuit about a year ago because the Biden immigration service issued a decision that we didn't like in a particular case. We thought that the rules were applied incorrectly by this particular immigration officer. Now we've sued the Service Center director, the Homeland Security Secretary, the USCIS director, and the U.S. Department of State, and we've teed that up. I expect a decision from that judge any day now. In Nebraska, there are only 4 or 5 federal judges, so I'm pretty familiar with all of them at this point. We have a federal judge who is actually the chief judge appointed by President Obama, and I expect a decision any day. Now, it could be a decision that we like or that we don't like. It could be a decision to uphold the denial that we disagreed with, or it could be a decision to mandate the immigration service, now under Trump, to adjudicate the case according to their rules. So we'll see. And then, of course, we have the option, and the government has the option, if they don't like the decision, to appeal it to the next level, which is the intermediate level, the circuit court. We'll see what happens. So the message I'm trying to communicate is a message of calm and a message of planning. We get decisions we don't like sometimes. There's an option. One thing that's of great benefit to people who are applying for immigration status is that typically a denial is without prejudice towards future cases. So if we file a case, we get a request for evidence, it's a tough one, we respond, and then the case is ultimately denied. A denial does not prejudice any future application. We get unlimited do-overs. So if we disagree with that decision, one option we have is to simply refile a case. That is very different than, say, like my colleagues who practice in the criminal courts or my colleagues who practice in civil litigation, where if you get a jury outcome that you don't like, you're more or less stuck with it, unless there's some very specific circumstances. If the jury comes back, or the finder of fact, who might be a jury or a judge, if you don't like their decision, well, you're probably going to be stuck with it. So in immigration, we've got that benefit. I've got a few resources that I wanted to share to the group. When I wrote the book last year, it occurred to me that there should be a resource for people pursuing O1 visas and EB1 green cards. And so what I did is I created a subreddit. I don't know if you guys use Reddit or not. I find it very helpful. So I created a special Reddit just for people who wanted to pursue O1 visas and EB1 green cards. I put a link to that in the description. So if you want to have a look at that, it's a very active community. About 500 members, and if you've got questions that I haven't answered, or you want a second opinion on, feel free to use that link. The other resource that I wanted you to see, give me one moment. AILA, so I'm a member of a group called AILA, American Immigration Lawyers Association. 14,000 immigration lawyers and judges all across the country. AILA is our trade association. They keep very careful track of the news. They are at the forefront of policy making. They testify in front of Congress all the time. I've been a proud AILA member for more than a decade. They keep very careful track of the news. And if you're worried about immigration, if you're worried about things that Trump might do, check on their immigration news portal for the latest, the best information that you can find. What I am finding is as whenever we go through a stressful time in life, when we go through a stressful time in life, people tend to speculate. They tend to conjecture. They tend to pass on gossip as if it's true. And this is true even in calmer times. One of the biggest parts of my job is to dispel the rumors and myths that people will hear from what I call well-meaning and misinformed friends. It goes along the lines of, well, my friend went through an immigration process and her lawyer said, ... Is that true? And sometimes it's true, and most of the time it's not. So as opposed to when, the first 5 years of my career, I was in litigation. I was in state and federal court with, sexual harassment, discrimination, car accident cases, the gamut of civil litigation. And it was very unusual for a client to say to me, oh, I heard on the news ... about this court case. Usually it was just, when am I getting my money, or how much do I have to pay? That was the typical client, response. Nowadays with immigration, we get a lot of different feedback from clients, like I said, well-meaning, misinformed friends. So in the chat, I put a link to the Reddit, the subreddit for O1 visas and EB1 green cards. And I put in a link to the AILA immigration news page. I'm also going to put in a link to the two webinars I mentioned at the top of the program. Next week, the Digital Economist with Navroop Sahdev, and then the week following, we're going to be speaking with Heather Poole. What happens when ICE shows up? And if you register for those webinars, free to register. Feel free to pass those links along to anyone you feel would benefit. If you register, you'll get a recording. So if you can't attend in person, that's perfectly fine. Just drop a registration in and I'll send the recording. I don't see any questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to chat about whatever is on your mind. I think a time like this calls for patience, perseverance, planning. They're all P words. Patience, perseverance, planning. Realize that even in the best of times, no one has a totally smooth immigration journey from having no status to having, citizenship or having a green card. The best way to handle the stress is to get the best information you can, make a plan, realize that there might be bumps along the road, and to be knowledgeable about where the variables lie so that you can psychologically sort of adjust for that. All right, I'm going to say goodbye to everyone. Oh, I have a question. Oh, never mind. I'm sorry. I already answered that question. I'm going to say goodbye to everyone. Bryony, how long is it taking to get your O1 visa at the moment so you don't have? Right now, I would remember, if you ever been through an immigration process before, there are several variables. So it's hard to say how long it will take in total without understanding the variables. The first variable is how long does it take to put together the application, the petition. For a complicated petition like an O1 visa, I usually budget 1 to 3 months. It could be faster, it could be shorter, longer. It depends on how quickly we're getting documents and information from people. The things that typically take the longest are getting the letters of recommendation, getting the upcoming itinerary sorted and written down, and then if there's anything that needs translating, remember, anything that we submit that's not in English needs translating. So how long does it take us to put together the case? First variable. Second variable, how are we using standard processing or premium processing? With standard processing, the government can take as long as they want to review the case. Right now, several months is my best estimate. There's no upper limit to the amount of time the government can take with standard processing. During the pandemic, I had standard processing cases that went on for a year. And usually what would happen is that people would eventually cough up the extra fee for what we call premium processing. Someone's saying, are we still not able to get the links? Let me see if I can. Webinar chat, host to panelist. I put the links in the chat. Can someone just say it? Can we see them now, or could someone say, do we see the links or do we not see the links? While someone answers that, I'll just continue. So with standard processing or premium processing, the government can take us as long as they want with standard. With premium, Andrea, you say you can't see the link, so I will. Let me see, how do I fix this? You know what I'll do? I'll put these links in the email that I will send to everyone who registered later today, because I'm not quite sure why it's not in the webinar chat, because it should be. Premium processing, 15 days. So that's a variable. Do you use standard processing or premium processing? As anyone who's been through an immigration process knows, hopefully the government approves the petition after the initial review. If they don't, they must come back with a request for further evidence, or RFE. They must tell us where they agree and where they disagree and give us an opportunity to respond. So that's another variable. Do we get a request for evidence or do we not? And is the request for evidence, is it relatively straightforward or is it more complicated? In O1 visas and EB1 green cards, a tough RFE might be, we just don't think the person's at the high level of achievement that we're looking for this classification. So if we get something like that, we might need longer to respond to than a more straightforward one. We get 87 days maximum to respond to an RFE. Once we respond, if it's a premium processing case, a new 15-day clock starts. If it's a standard processing case, I assume we go to the back of the pile. They're not totally clear on that. And then I would expect a final decision. If the final decision is to approve, if the person's outside the US, then go through the embassy process. I usually budget a week or two for the embassy process. If the case is ultimately denied, like I said, a denial is without prejudice towards future cases. We can try again. And if the denial is truly outrageous and we want to go fight them in court, we can do that. So Bryony, I hope I answered your question. The challenge is with any immigration application is we cannot precisely time the outcome, and this has been true for since I've been in practice. In more pro-immigrant contexts and more immigrant skeptic context, it's very difficult to precisely time an outcome. All right, so I will, like I said, I'll send these links to everyone. I will send a recording to everyone, and I hope to see you again next Thursday. And if you have any questions in the meantime, keep me posted. All right, guys, have a great day.